Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It's May 4th, 2019. Again, may the 4th be with you. We're in part two of our interview with Sean and Crystal Escobar. We just did a good 3 to 4 hours with Sean and Crystal about their faith journey, about their lives as teenagers, the sexual shame that they dealt with as kind of semi-active Mormons, them both serving missions and turning their lives around from a church's perspective, getting married, ultimately in the temple, and then the joys and the sadness of trying to live this Orthodox life on what we call the hustling for worthiness sort of cycle, and ultimately how that led to a faith crisis for both Sean and then Crystal, and how they've made sense of their faith journey now. And it was just a beautiful, powerful, vulnerable, and important session. So I'm very happy that we spent that time going deep in the long format. Part two of this interview is now definitely equally as important in so many ways. Some of you may have already heard the news, and I'm going to tell the high-level story before we get into it, but you just need to know how important this story is. When Sean was a boy, he was sleeping over at a friend's house. His friend was the son of Sterling Van Wagenen, and Sterling Van Wagenen, for those of you who don't know, is one of the most famous Mormon filmmakers of all time. He produced a film that ended up winning an Academy Award, which is rare for a Mormon filmmaker, but he's also, taught at BYU. He's taught at the University of Utah as a filmmaker, and perhaps most importantly, he is responsible for producing and directing the Mormon temple ceremony films, and he's just been a legend within Mormonism as a filmmaker for so many years. And he's also produced films for the Mormon subsidiary, the LDS Church's subsidiary, that produced as recently as last year a Mormon film about Jane Manning James and Joseph Smith. But the point is, he abused Sean when Sean was a young boy, sexually abused him, and the church knew about it, and the church covered it up and neglected to give Sean any resources or support. And he wasn't excommunicated, this Sterling Van Wagenen person, and he went on to serve as a gospel doctrine teacher, as a stake high counselor, and again, he ended up both teaching at BYU and University of Utah, and eventually was asked to help co-produce these Mormon movies. And the fact that the church did not excommunicate him, that they allowed him to remain a member in good standing, and then gave him continued positions of influence and support, allowed Sterling Van Wagenen to sexually abuse other victims. And we're going to get into that, and we're going to get into, again, not as a reason to pile on Sterling Van Wagenen, who now is about to go to prison, but the bigger problem we have is with the systematic cover-up of sexual abuse. We've covered it with the Chris Swallow interview that I did on Mormon Stories Podcast, where he experienced abuse at the hands of Lowell Robinson, who is no longer with us. And we also have covered it with McKenna Denson and Joseph Bishop, and we've talked about how the church covered up Joseph Bishop's abuse, and continued to give him callings and didn't punish him, and how McKenna Denson suffered as a result. We've talked about Sam Young, who simply just tried to call attention to the abuse that's been perpetrated, and he was excommunicated immediately for calling the church to accountability for its protection of abusers at the expense of the abused. And it's just mind-boggling, and this is going to be yet another testimony of how the church has cared more about its reputation and its legal risks, and whatever financial concerns might come about as a result of broad awareness of these abuses, and how victims suffer as a result. And so that's just a setup for Sean's story. And even though you've already heard his whole faith journey, it's now time to kind of focus like lasers on this story, Sean. So let's go back. Sean and Crystal, welcome back to Mormon Stories.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And if it's okay, let's go back, Sean, and tell us, whatever you want to about the events leading up to that awful night of abuse that you experienced.
Sure. I was best friends with two of Sterling Van Wagenen's youngest sons. We lived about three doors down, and that's how we got to know them. And we did everything together. All day, every day we played together. And these were like my little brothers. I didn't have little brothers or little sisters, but these were my little brothers. We were really close. And I was sleeping over at their house in the basement. And I was sleeping on the couch, and one of his sons was on one couch, one was on the floor. And in the middle of the night, I woke up to a hand outstretched over me, and it was down my pants. I was laying on the couch, and my head was up against one of the armrests, and the hand was kind of coming up over the top of my face and my chest, but it was down my pants, and I woke up and was alarmed, and I froze. And then I didn't know what to do. My head was like this, so I could look down and see what was happening, but I couldn't see who was doing it. And so I began to stir like I was going to wake up, and hoping that would make it stop. And he retreated. He pulled his hand out, and then about a few moments later, maybe a couple minutes later, it was back, and his hand was again down my pants. And I froze. I was frozen. Didn't know what to do. He was stroking my genitals. And so then I stirred again, and he retreated again. A few moments later, he came again. It was the third time, and he put his hand down my pants, and I mustered the courage to sit up. I sat up really fast, and I looked at him, and he stepped back, and he was standing kind of behind the end of the couch there, and he looked like he was in a daze, and he was looking at the TV. The TV had a black and white movie on, and he had a remote controller in his hand, but there was no sound on the TV at all. And I looked at him, and I just made a run for the bathroom. I ran out around the couch, out the room, up the stairs, and there was a bathroom on the mid-level there, and I locked myself in the bathroom. And he came repeatedly to the door, asking me to come out, whispering that I needed to come out now. And he must have come back to the door 3 or 4 times over the span of maybe 30 minutes. And then he never came back again. And I just kept telling him that I'm sick. I'm really sick. I think he recognized that I wasn't coming out and that I knew what he'd done. There was a cat in there, a big orange cat, got locked in the bathroom with me. And I just pet the cat all night. And I didn't sleep a wink. It was very uncomfortable. I had to just sit on the tile floor, linoleum, whatever it was. I just sat there. In the morning, I started, it was a long night, but I started to hear people waking up in the morning, big family. I heard everybody moving around, and I thought, okay, it was probably safe to come out now. I came out, went straight to the phone, called my mom, and asked her to come get me as quickly as she possibly could. My mom came and got me, and we were going to drive home, I guess, and we were in a drive-through. She was going to get me a breakfast sandwich, and I just right there in the drive-thru, I just told her what had happened to me. And she said, she didn't say anything. She just turned white. She just pale white. She was obviously very, very upset.
Let me just ask you, how old were you at the time?
13.
13 years old.
I just turned 13.
So that's kind of like pubescent, prepubescent, like right around that time.
Yeah.
What was Sterling Van Wagenen's reputation in the community?
He had a lot of esteem. Everybody knew that, he was the co-founder of the Sundance Film Festival, and they knew that he was like, he was a BYU professor guy. He was like you said, the gospel doctrine teacher, the filmmaker. So he actually had a lot of esteem. Even my parents looked up to him a lot because of the things that he'd accomplished and who he was.
Okay. So a very influential person.
Yeah. There was never any grooming. I never talked to him really. He was very reclusive. He would just see him come and go every now and then, but never talk to you. I don't know if he ever even said 2 words to me hardly before that.
And I'm just going to break in and say that the Truth and Transparency Commission has released previously an audio of Sean's confrontation with Sterling Van Wagenen. We're going to be releasing our own edited version of that on the Mormon Stories podcast feed. So you'll be able to not only hear Sean telling the story right now, but you will be able to go and actually listen to Sean's confrontation of Sterling and how he admits to everything that's going on. And we're going to be referencing that audio recording in this discussion because this is our way to discuss not only what happened, but also Sean's confrontation of Sterling. Okay, so you have this thing happen to you. And is there any way for you to express just that night what and this is kind of before you had really activated or right around the time you were starting to activate in the church?
Right, that's right.
What goes through a kid's mind when some adult at night is groping them, and then afterwards when you're in that bathroom, terrified? How can you express what goes through a kid's mind and what they're feeling?
I just remember feeling scared. I wasn't able to assign any meaning to it.
Okay.
I just remember being afraid and not wanting to come out of the bathroom for fear that he'd take me somewhere or do something else to me. I was scared.
Okay. So the next day you're riding with your mom in the car and you tell her?
Yeah. Yeah. And she just said, okay. She was horrified. She's always been horrified by it. But she took me to my dad's office, and we went there and to tell my dad. And I remember my dad was very angry.
And this would have been right around the time they were really reactivating and getting...
That's absolutely right.
So here they are, like just starting to get more active in the church again, and then this happens to their son.
Yeah. I was there in the office, and I was sitting in the reception where the secretary desk was, and then all of a sudden, it was in the morning. My dad had just found out, and then in walks Sterling. I was right there by myself. He walks in, and I was scared again. And he said, "Where are your parents?" And I pointed to the warehouse, and then the warehouse room, and then I ran and hid under a desk. And I knew that he knew. I knew at that point that he was aware that I'd caught him, kind of thing.
Is there a fear of telling on the perpetrator?
I wasn't afraid then. Well, I guess I was. I went and hid under a desk.
Yeah.
Like, that's hard to believe.
Yeah.
Like, I'm almost embarrassed to admit that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's fear.
And what do you know about that conversation between Sterling and your parents?
I don't know. I think he told them that I did it, kind of thing. And I think I don't know. I don't know exactly what he told them. All I know is that from that point, my parents contacted a local bishop that also was in the neighborhood, and told that bishop what had happened to me. And that bishop said, I'm in close touch with President Harold Brown, the state president, Harold Brown, who happened to be a psychologist, and he happened to be the head of church social services at the time. And he said, "Don't worry, I'll handle it. I'll turn this over to Harold Brown, and we'll get this all taken care of." And that was pretty much the extent of it. My parents felt this was a friend of ours, and and they felt confident that he would go and report that, which he did. And then Harold Brown called Sterling in.
Okay. And what do we know about what happened there?
We don't know.
Okay.
Don't know what happened in that church court or council. Don't have any indication of what he told them, because the church never verified anything with my parents, and they never checked in on me. We have not the slightest clue. We don't know what he told them.
So did the bishop, your actual bishop or stake president, ever speak to your parents or you about the abuse?
I can't answer that. I don't know. As far as I know, relative to the church court, the church council that Sterling had to go through, we were never part of that process. They never confirmed anything with us. They never corroborated the stories. That never took place. I never had a bishop or a stake president show up on my doorstep checking in on me and seeing how I was doing.
Or call you into their office or?
Nothing.
Okay.
No.
And do you think they contacted your parents and?
I don't know.
Let them know if there was any disciplinary stuff or?
I think my parents were just assured repeatedly that the church will handle it. Right. The church will do the right thing. The church will handle it. Were any counseling services offered to you or your parents? No.
In terms of therapy or trauma, or any therapy of any kind, mental health services for you or your parents or your family?
Not only were we not offered any of that, Sterling wasn't either.
Okay. But let's worry about the victim. Like, here you are having been sexually abused in a church context, and the church knew.
Yeah. I don't know if he'd been employed by BYU at that point or if he was employed by BYU right after the abuse, but he'd done work for the church. He'd done movies for the church. So, I would have thought that being that it was church related and that he was, under that umbrella, I would have thought that they would have offered some kind of support or something.
Okay, so you're told that this will be taken care of. You're not offered services. Then you've heard that there may have been a disciplinary council. I don't even know that we have a way to really confirm that. But talk about that, what we know about that.
According to Sterling, because I did meet with him, he said that he was disfellowshipped for 2 years. And that's all I know about that in terms of what was handed down was a disfellowshipment of 2 years, according to him.
So again, not an excommunication of a pedophile.
Yeah.
Even though he admitted it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
when you think about Sam Young or others being excommunicated, it's kind of mind-boggling that somehow Lee and Cody Young create a support group for post-Mormons that are excommunicated. Sam Young calls the church out saying protect children, excommunicated. An actual pedophile is not excommunicated, but is simply disfellowshipped.
Yeah, not only that, he went on to, according to his bio, he went on to work for the church, and BYU is a church-owned school. And he went on to work at BYU from the time that he abused me for another 6 years. He was employed there.
So they hire him.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to serve as a gospel doctrine teacher, to go on and serve in Stake High Council, and then to work on the temple videos. And, clearly members weren't informed about his actions, which leaves members vulnerable to thinking, well, this man is being hired by the church. He works for the church. He's doing temple videos. He's clearly safe. And tell us how that leaves other victims vulnerable, potential victims vulnerable.
Yeah. And that's what I always wondered. In fact, even at 13, there was some very sincere concern for his children. I was worried about his kids.
Yeah. So, talk about the aftermath for you personally. So what's it like to then walk through the world and the church knowing that this happened and that this man maybe wasn't punished? So you go into adolescence and early adulthood. How does that affect you?
You become very guarded. You become very skeptical of people, especially people in authority. You start to wonder. You believe in real life monsters from that point moving forward. Really, my innocence was gone. I began to sleep with a 10-inch hunting knife at my side or under my pillow at all times, just in case someone was to try to harm me while I was sleeping. I was afraid of the dark. I had a lot of anger problems. Very suspicious of men. Yeah, it just goes on and on. It's very pervasive. It kind of affects all areas of your life. Yeah.
Talk about the extent to which the police were or weren't involved in Sterling's behavior.
I didn't know there was a police report, and I tried to pull that, and then I couldn't find it. It was actually Ryan McKnight that found it through Truth and Transparency. He dug it up, and when he called me, I never knew there was one, and he called me and he said, "There's a police report." And I said, "You got to be kidding me. What does it say?" Sterling had gone to the police, and he said that his therapist, not the stake present, but his therapist had required of him that he go report this to the police. He also said that he patted my genitals over the pants for 2 minutes, is what he claimed.
That's what Sterling told the police in the police report.
Yeah. It also said that my parents were contacted and that my dad had said, we're not going to be pursuing charges at this time, and we support Sterling in rehabilitating, and that was pretty much the extent of it. My parents, I've spoken to them at great length about this, and back then there was a lot of victim shaming. It was far worse than it is today, and my parents were worried about me. They were worried about my identity being leaked. They were worried about me being interrogated. They were worried about me being labeled and teased and bullied at school. And so they didn't want me to drag me through that. They didn't want to. They were trying their darndest to protect me. And they just assumed that the church would handle all of that.
But I also just have to note that part of the church's culture around abuse is to pressure members not to take these matters to legal authorities, not to take these matters into the judicial process, because while a perpetrator may deserve punishment, it's the church's good name that gets soiled, and the church becomes liable for financial or legal risk when these things come out. So I can't say what was said to your dad or what your parents may have been feeling, but what I can say time and time again is that when parents of abuse victims start interacting with church leaders, it's very clear that the pressure is to, quote, believe in the repentance process, have faith in the atonement, don't take this through the legal process because it'll hurt everyone involved. And you have to feel like the main motives of the church in encouraging and fostering that sort of culture is the church is wanting to self-protect. It's wanting to keep its reputation intact. And so my guess is, like so many other victims and the family of victims, your parents would have been pressured to not pursue legal action.
Back then, it was. I'm aware of so many other cases, and the norm was to let the church handle it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a police report was filed, and the police were told that your parents didn't want to press charges, so it was dropped, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're terrified at night, afraid of the dark, sleeping with a knife, distrusting male authority, distrusting authority. You did talk last episode about, sexually acting out in your teen years. And again, you're seeing all these shining examples of priesthood leadership and what it's like to be a true Mormon. You're not living up to it. Looking back now, how do you make sense of your teenage years and even your young adult years and your shame and your guilt and your worthiness and, your meetings with priesthood leaders about your unworthiness? How do you make sense of that now in terms of, what you went through?
I don't, I have to be honest about what I feel. And me having sex as a 17-year-old with a steady girlfriend, I don't put any stock into that. So were a lot of my Mormon friends. They were doing the same thing, but they just didn't go confess like I did. So I don't think I had an unhealthy sexual life. I don't think I had that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So any other effects of the abuse on you in your adolescence or adulthood?
Adulthood, yeah. I mean, how I am as a dad.
So talk about it.
I'm ultra protective. Painfully protective. I don't trust people. I don't trust men. And I make it very clear. And I've offended quite a few people because, the thought of my daughter, for instance, having a teacher, and I've already ensured that it's a woman because you've seen me, I've gone to the school, and if my little girls are assigned a male teacher, I will go and remove them. I will ensure that they get a woman teacher because predominantly it's men that are the culprits, predominantly. So I'm just playing the odds there. But the thought of, I usually contact my kids' teachers and I tell them if there's ever a male substitute, I want to know beforehand. That's how I operate. And that kind of prevention, that kind of awareness, it's every fabric. I mean, it's part of everything I do in life. If my little daughter, who's, let's say she's 4 or 5, if she goes to a friend's house, I actually make sure. I actually call ahead and I'll make sure that the husband will not be there. If he is there, the wife has to be present. The wife can't go to the grocery store and leave the kids home with the husband. It's painstaking. And I've even had one person go so far as to say, "Are you accusing my husband of being a pedophile?" And I'll say, no, but it's not a risk I'm willing to take. I even had to go to one of my neighbors because nicest guy in the world, but, works from home. Do I trust him? I don't trust anybody. I don't, not with my kids. I know the catastrophic effect that sexual abuse has on children. I know the lifelong effect that it has, and I'll do whatever it takes, all the hard, painful things in order to ensure that they get to 18. If I can get them to 18 years old, unscathed around child sex abuse, then I will have given them a gift.
I'm trying to decide if it's a blessing or a curse that you had this happen to you, because on the one hand, it sounds like you protected your children.
Yeah.
And that's because you experienced abuse yourself. So, but I also hear you saying there's a bit of a downside to that level of protection.
Yeah, the downside is I worry, I stress.
Constantly worry, yeah.
Yeah. And that's hard, yeah. It's a lot of burden. It's a lot of stress. And I would never take a $100 bill and put it on the ground. So I sure as hell am never going to put my kids in a position, ever. And I see the negligence of my neighbors and my kids' friends, and it kills me. Even within my own family, it literally kills me. Because you wouldn't put $100 on the ground, would you? You wouldn't. But you let your kids go sleep over at some guy's house. And it's hard for me to witness that. And so, yeah, I've become very fanatical in terms of prevention. It's everything to me.
there's a really important movie that's come out on Netflix over the past year called Abducted in Plain Sight. And it's this story of these Mormon families, and it ends up that the parents give this pedophile access to their daughter, and even after there's abuse, they keep giving him access. And you watch this movie, and everyone should watch it, and you just wonder how in the world could these parents have given access to their daughter with this pedophile. And it's a scary, powerful story. But you guys continued living in the neighborhood, and you continued being friends with this family.
We moved.
Okay, you moved.
Yeah, we moved from Holiday to Sandy.
Okay.
Yeah, we had moved. So I didn't have to see him on an ongoing basis. And unfortunately, I love those kids, but we weren't friends anymore.
So you didn't remain friends with Sterling's?
No, that friendship's only recently being rekindled.
Okay. But I'm aware personally of other families that lived in that same neighborhood, friends of mine, whose parents knew about this abuse and allowed their children to keep going over and even spend the night at the Van Wagenen's house. And it blew my mind the fact that even when, unlike you, even in the 80s and 90s and even modern day, parents can know about abuse that's going on in certain homes, but somehow still let their kids be exposed to the risks of that abuse. There's something really weird about that.
That's what happened to her family.
Mm-hmm. Talk about that.
Yeah, it's just, I mean...
I'm sorry if you didn't want to talk about that, but it's
just
that...
Only whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Okay. I guess it's just hard for me to... I've never really talked... I've never been public about...
You don't have to.
Yeah.
Just don't. It's okay.
Whatever you want.
Okay.
Even if you just summarize or just...
It is hard to know that, a lot of people knew what was going on, and it just continued to happen repeatedly. And as far as I know, not much was done about it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have continued. So, yeah, I think that's about all I want to say, because it's not really my story to share.
That's fair, yeah.
Silence is the killer, right?
Yeah.
Really quickly, Crystal, did you know about this abuse when you guys got married, early years of your marriage? And if so, could you tell there was something wrong?
Yeah, Sean always told me about that. And I knew right away how protective he was. He told my dad when I think I was pregnant with Lily, my first, and he called my dad and said, "You know what, I'm sorry, but you will never see our kids." And they had a big fight, and yeah, so he never, I think he saw them one time. We all went to eat, and that was the only time he's ever seen our kids in 13 years. And yeah, it's been, I don't really talk much with my dad, just maybe every few months. I'll get together with him a couple times a year to go to lunch or dinner or something with my sisters, but
I would like to say that my opinion of abusers has evolved greatly. Even just since I've gone through this with Sterling, my opinion around all of that has changed dramatically. I used to be cut and dry. I used to say castrate them. I used to say stick them all on an island. I used to say stick them in a room and give the parents a knife, lock them in there. I used to be really, really bad about it. But I think I was looking at it all wrong.
Why?
Because they're people. They're people, and they're human, and they have hearts. And every now and then there's a monster, a legitimate monster. But through a friend of mine recently, I've learned that a friend of mine is also a pedophile. And he got arrested. He went to prison. And he did everything that they asked of him. He did his time, he did his rehabilitation, he did his therapy, it's ongoing therapy. And I see now, as long as it's not secret and as long as it's addressed, it can be controlled, and these guys can rehabilitate. And so that's been eye-opening for me, and I've stopped taking such a hard stance as I used to. I used to be very, very angry.
Yeah, and that has always been really difficult for me because I still love my dad, and so it is hard to know how you're supposed to respond to somebody like that. Like you feel like, are you supposed to love them? Are you supposed to trust them? Like, where do you draw the line? Like, how do you still show compassion for somebody, but still protect yourself and your kids at the same time? So yeah, I like that Sean has kind of evolved into this new way of seeing things, because it's always been a struggle for him to know that I would go to lunch with my dad. He couldn't understand why I'd even continue a relationship with him.
Right. So it's complicated.
Yeah.
So you guys have to listen to the Sterling von Wagenen interview where Sean confronts Sterling, and I'm just stunned that he admits all the things that he admits in there. But he goes on to admit multiple affairs, during his time as an active devout Mormon, right? Multiple affairs with women and with men, prostitution, right? And, all during the time that he is perceived as an active, faithful, devout member, that he's working for BYU, that he's producing films for the church, that he's producing the temple video. Like, he admits this life. However, he denies ever abusing another child. In the interview, we'll talk about that in a bit. But the point that I wanted to call out is, I don't believe religions want there to be abuse. I don't believe the church is hoping that there's abuse. I think the church wants all abuse to stop. I know that they condemn it. But I just want to sort of call out my concerns about religion and abuse, which is that religions provide community, but by providing community, they provide access of perpetrators to victims, vulnerable people. Like, whether it's Boy Scouts or the church, people who are predators really like religions because you can get access to children and to vulnerable people. But what compounds that is, in Mormonism, we're taught that leaders are called of God, which means that whether it's a leader who's now put in a position of power over us, that can make us more vulnerable to abuse. Or after an abuse happens, however the leaders decide to handle it, we're in a power down position as well, because we're supposed to respect and obey and honor our leaders. So if a leader says, be quiet about this, trust the repentance process, don't take this to the legal authorities, either way, that hierarchy, that patriarchy, that structure of authority and obedience is going to make members more vulnerable to abuses. And then we're taught that our leaders have the spirit of discernment. So if our leaders, as Mormons, call someone to a position of authority, they must be righteous, they must be worthy, because certainly Sterling van Wagenen couldn't be making temple videos for the church or working at BYU if he's abusing children, right?
Right.
So this teaching that leaders are inspired, these teachings that leaders speak for God, these teachings that leaders have the power, the gift of discernment, all foster a culture that makes victims more vulnerable and that gives power to perpetrators. Go beyond that. Unfortunately, we know now that the way that the church has handled these abuse situations over the years is motivated in part by the church's need to protect its reputation and to protect itself against lawsuits. And this was brought out again just this week with the HBO Vice story on the West Virginia case, where again the church covered up abuse, protected perpetrators at the expense of victims. We find out that the church put together a 1-800 number, but not for the victims. Mm-hmm. It's a 1-800 number that goes to Curtin McConkie, the law firm. And the way that 1-800 number has been used, it's for bishops to call Curtin McConkie as a law firm, not to get support for the victims, but for the law firm, Curtin McConkie, to coach the church leaders in ways that would minimize the exposure of the church to lawsuits. Right. And that's why for decades, Mormon bishops don't report abuse. They don't report it to law officials in many instances. These things are kept under wraps. They're kept quiet. and victims are often just told to trust again in the repentance process, trust in the atonement, and again, ward members and stake members are not notified that there are perpetrators out there in their ranks,
Right.
which leaves the church open, just like with the Boy Scouts, to multiple instances of repeated abuse because the members aren't informed.
The other issue is the sealed cases. A church that brings in $10 billion a year in annual tithing revenue, 50, 60 million a year in settlements, legal settlements for, sexual abuse, that's nothing to them. But once they settle with these victims, the cases are sealed and nobody knows what happened.
Right. So they're paying people to stay silent so that it can't be made known. And that silence becomes deadly because it allows these abusers to go to other wards, to go to their stakes, to stay in the same ward and stakes, and then to abuse more and more people. Because we do know that pedophiles are almost always repeat offenders. They don't just offend one time. Again, the church has been terrible about providing mental health services to victims. So victims are often neglected. And then by giving them continued callings and positions of influence, gives them status and continued access. So here we, with the Joseph Bishop case, we know that he was put in the primary over children after the church had discovered that he was a sexual abuser. Why in the world would they, and that he was in, even up until last year, he was in the Sunday school presidency. So they're putting a known sex abuser over youth or over children in the church. How in the world could that happen? So for so many reasons, this is just deeply problematic. And then, of course, the church, through its influence in the legislative process in the state of Utah, has made it so there's a clergy exemption.
That's right.
So, a school teacher or a school district member or any, adult in Utah, when they find out a child has been sexually abused, it's mandatory that they report it to the officials. But the church has worked through the legislature to create an exemption so that the clergy do not have to ever report any of this to law officials. So why in the world would bishops and stake presidents be given that exemption when they're usually the first people to find out? And so many, including the Truth and Transparency Commission, have been calling on the Utah State Legislature to remove that clergy exemption because it's essential that everyone be a mandatory reporter when a child has been sexually abused, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then not to mention just finally this sin culture of like trust in the atonement, trust in repentance. That's often used as a way to pressure parents of victims and victims to rush to forgiveness in a way that does not protect other people from abuse and that doesn't always meet the level of severity of the offense or in some cases the crime. It's a twisted teaching.
In my case, I don't know what it is in the law that prohibits me from seeing that court, but that church court. But I feel legislation should be in place so that if a crime, not a transgression, not a sin, a crime is committed on a child, absolutely all of that information, the details of that court, should be public knowledge.
You mean the disciplinary court?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. They shouldn't have the right to keep that private.
But
it's a crime.
It's protected, right?
It's not a transgression. It's a crime.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so back to your story. So Sterling Van Wagenen goes on again to work for BYU, to do the temple videos, to be a stake high councilman. And, the question in your mind, so let's fast forward. At some point, you start thinking about, maybe I want to tell the story. So take us to how you started wondering and considering coming clean. Why would you ever do that?
My whole life, I wondered if he'd done it to other people. My whole life, I wondered if he'd done it to his own kids. My whole life, I wondered if there was prevention in place, provisions to protect the children and protect neighbor kids. And I always felt like I was powerless and my hands were tied because I couldn't do anything to ensure that was in place, those kinds of things. I would always ask my mom about him. What's the story there? You know, is you think he's being good? Do you think he's hurting other people? And the understanding was that his wife was keeping him accountable. That it was his wife was keeping a close eye on him, and she was making sure that nothing of anything of the sort could even come close to potentially happening. And so we just, you know, that's where the trust level was around that. January 2018, I had enough. I was so sick of wondering if he'd done it to other people, and if I wanted to know if his adult children knew what he'd done to me. I wanted to make sure, because I knew he had a lot of grandkids, I wanted to make sure that none of these grandkids were ever allowed to be alone with him, and certainly never have sleepovers. And it was just, I got to tell you, it was just haunting me. My whole life it haunted me, but it started to get heavier, and I finally, through another interview, I was able to identify why that was. My two oldest children have hit that age that I was. My oldest is 13. And I excuse me. I sent his wife a message, and I said, I kind of wrote a letter, and I said, I'm sorry to bring this up, to dig this up, because for all I knew, they had it under control, but something didn't feel right about it, and I said, I'm sorry, but I need to make sure that there's provisions in place that protect the kids, and I need to make sure that your adult children are aware of what happened, and I promise, if you'll just assure me that that's the case, I'll just let this go on living. And I never got a response. So 7 months later, I didn't know what to do. I just began to contact each of his children independently, one by one.
They had been close friends, right?
I love those people. I always have. But no, we hadn't stayed close friends.
No, at some point you had been close friends.
The two younger children were like my younger siblings. All the older children could never have been better to me. The best. Wonderful people. And I had to contact each of them, and I told them, I said, I put it out there. This is what your father did to me. And they were all shocked. They had no idea.
They had no idea. So it had been kept from them. Not
a clue. Telling them was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. It wouldn't have been so hard had they known. But because they didn't know, I got to tell you, I broke down. I don't think I've ever cried that hard in my life. Just because I knew what I was doing to their world. And they don't deserve that. Like, what did they do? Nothing. They've never hurt me. And in fact, they couldn't have been more gracious. They were upset, but their concern was for me. They were so worried about me. I met with one of them in person, and we had a really great conversation. I laid it all out, and she. The wife of Sterling had repeatedly, she's some kind of a social worker or something, but she repeatedly said I should meet with him. And didn't want to, wasn't open to it. And then one of the children, when I met with that child of his, also, they were very insistent that I need to meet with him, that he'll give you that assurance, and you obviously need closure around this. And so you should meet with him, and he'll tell you, he'll give you that assurance that there's never been any other victims before or after. You were the only one ever. And
which is what Sterling tells you in the interview. No other victims.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And his kids believed him too. And so did my wife, and so did my parents. And I even started to believe him after that interview.
So they encouraged you to meet with him?
Yeah. So, I finally thought, well, okay, I'm going to do it. And I planned it through his wife. And then for probably 3 or 4 days beforehand, I was in bad shape. I couldn't function, couldn't hardly eat, couldn't sleep. I was getting really sick. I'm pale, weak, and every day I thought, I just got to cancel this. In fact, I remember my sweet wife saying to me, "What are you doing? What are you doing? You have every reason to be happy, fulfilled. You've got so much going for you. Why dig this up?" And the next day would come, and same thing, just miserable. The day came, and by that point, I felt numb and just going through the motions and went. I wanted to record it because I was afraid that he might try to harm me or threaten me, or I might learn about another crime. So that's why I recorded it.
It must be terrifying to confront your perpetrator.
The only way I could explain it is what I told you. I felt like I was a little kid again.
Meaning what?
I was scared. Look at me, I'm a full-grown man. Why was I scared?
Right.
I'm not scared of anybody else.
You didn't seem scared in the interview.
You know what?
I sat and listened to the whole thing.
After that interview,
Before we talk about that.
Okay.
So it's at your house, is that right? The interview? He comes to your house?
We met at a friend's house, mutual location, yeah.
Okay. You met at a friend's house. Okay. And in the beginning of the interview, he meets you, he meets Crystal. Crystal goes downstairs and you start talking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do you want to say about all the stuff that happened in that interview, all the things he said? And
It was alarming. It was really alarming because he told me some things that I didn't expect.
I was just surprised that he would even meet with you. And the same thing with Joseph Bishop. Like, I'm so glad Joseph Bishop, that this recording exists of Joseph Bishop, and because so often just abuse victims are just never believed.
They don't, yeah.
So the fact that there are recordings of these men admitting their guilt is gold, right? But then I'm thinking, why would he ever agree to meet with you, let alone be honest? Like,
I mean, I think the only reason he agreed to meet with me is because his children were so concerned for my welfare. And I think they were advocating that he help me. I think that's why he was.
They were demanding it.
Yeah.
So he was kind of forced.
And I believed him. I believed him because not only did he seem like a very nice person with his voice, and he was very friendly when I met him, I believed him because he had divulged all of that other stuff. I'm like, why would he tell you that he had prostitutes and even men prostitutes if he had anything to hide? Like, he didn't have to tell you those things. So he got me there because he shared so much, and that made me believe that, well, he's being honest. Like, those are some, kind of embarrassing things to share.
Right. So what was shocking? And you'd even said to me, Sean, that maybe that disclosure on the part of a perpetrator is a way to control people, right? Is an act of control and manipulation. Is that possible? Didn't you share that?
I think it's a negotiation tactic. I do. I think I'll give you a little, then I don't have to give you what you're really after.
It's a way to keep you from going to the authorities, right? Maybe, or to going public in a way that could be embarrassing to him.
By telling me those things?
Yeah, by meeting with you at all. I mean, other than to please his kids,
That's the only reason I can think he would meet with me. And why did he give me that? Why did he give me those things, those transgressions? I don't know. Maybe he felt he could trust me. I don't know.
You also thought that maybe it's a way of him to confess and to really open up.
Maybe.
Yeah. Atonement, right?
Maybe.
So what was shocking?
Seemed like a great person. That's what I thought too.
And you listen to it, he's got kind of that Mormon priesthood, patriarchy voice. It's like this could be any general authority, right? The way he talks with the tone. Yeah. It's just, this is like every bishop or stake president I've ever met.
He's obviously unbelievably intelligent.
Yeah.
Carries himself well. What else surprised me about that interview?
And I've already mentioned it, but say the shocking things that he admitted to you, just, in case someone's jumped to this.
He said there was many affairs. He said that he was sexually promiscuous, and because he had depression and anxiety, his particular way of making a connection when he was feeling those emotions was sexually related. He called it a connection. He said that the only way to stop the pain and make a connection was through a sexual outlet. This led to sexual promiscuity. Was the way basically?
Yeah, he basically says that night that he abused you, he and his wife had some big fight, and he was so depressed and scared that the marriage might be over, and so his acting out sexually was a way to manage his own depression. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Yeah, that's what he said.
Yeah.
He said he'd had affairs. I asked him, "Are some of them with men?" And he said yes.
Yeah.
I asked him if he was a pedophile, and he said no. He would classify it as bisexual. I asked him if he'd ever looked at child pornography. He said no, that he looked at pornography and male pornography. I asked if there was ever provisions in place to avoid being around children, and he said he thinks his wife put provisions in place, but he wasn't absolutely sure. But it doesn't matter because there was never a reoccurrence. He said that my story or my event there, whatever you call it, brought an awareness about in him of what he was capable of, and it changed his life. And he basically the awareness ensured that he would never do anything like that ever again. And that's what he told me. And I said, "Have you been around your grandchildren?" He said, "Oh yeah, never had a problem." He said, "I don't lie very well."
That was chilling when he says to you, "I'm not a very good liar."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. John, there were so many things that was mind-boggling for me. Crystal, to your point, I did this whole interview, and then afterwards, I don't know if you noticed how depleted I was.
Yeah.
But I was I even said, I can't even process this.
Before we jump there, he also admits that he was disfellowshipped but not excommunicated. So here we know that even though the church excommunicates Leah and Cody Young, Sam Young, Kate Kelly, me, Jeremy Runnels, people who are truth tellers, people who are trying to get the church to be more honest, people who are trying to protect women or trying to protect children. Lavina Fielding Anderson, let's not forget, one of the September 6. What was Lavina Fielding Anderson's offense? In 1993, ironically, what?
Same year
you were being sexually abused, Lavina Fielding Anderson was making a list of abusive Mormon priesthood leaders.
Yeah.
She was excommunicated before Sam Young for making a list of abusive Mormon priesthood leaders.
Yeah.
They're excommunicating whistleblowers and truth tellers, and they're not excommunicating pedophiles.
Yeah.
So he admits he was not excommunicated.
Two more things. He admitted that he'd never confessed any of his affairs, is what I gathered. He said he would never had any other subsequent church courts or church councils or discipline.
Which calls into question this notion of spirit of discernment. We all think that our leaders have some special power, and we trust in that. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty clear that wasn't in effect, just like with Mark Hoffman and all the other issues, because he's being called to stake high councils while he's having multiple affairs with men and women and prostitutes, right? So, like, where's the spirit of discernment?
Mm-hmm.
Well, where's the spirit of discernment using him to make those temple videos? Now, I asked him repeatedly in the interview if he had done the temple videos, and I asked him 2 times very point blank, and he denied having any involvement in the temple videos, which he actually did. In 2000, and I think it was 13, he produced the 3 most recent sets of temple videos, directed them.
And I'm sure he had to sign some non-disclosure, just like with the people who take the second anointing. You just don't talk about temple stuff. And so I'm sure his unwillingness to respond to that question was...
Coincidentally, that was also the year of one of the occurrences for this second victim.
Right. So let's talk. So, okay. So anything else you want to say about what he did or didn't disclose in that interview before we talk about the aftermath of the interview? Was there anything else? Oh, there was something for me. One of the most powerful parts of the entire interview is the very end where you guys are talking more informally. And he says, in effect, you start talking about your faith crisis and, you know, your views on God and Jesus and the atonement and the things you've struggled with. He admits the gospel and the church have never really worked for me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So here he is again, helping with the temple ceremony, serving as a high councilman. And he says, the gospel and the church have never really worked for me. And what I interpreted that to mean is he had tried to stop the sexually acting out, tried to heal, tried to stop the abuse, and he'd never been able to stop. And the atonement didn't work. Why? Because the atonement doesn't fix sexual abuse. It doesn't cure a pedophile. And he was being vulnerable and just saying, this gospel thing never worked for me. And then he goes on to say, I hold on to the atonement with hopes that everything will be made right in the afterlife. And again, there's a bright side to the atonement, but there's a dark side to the atonement because
it's a mulligan.
It's a mulligan, right? Talk about that. What do you mean?
It's a mulligan. It's I can't control myself here in this life, but thank goodness there's an atonement, and I'll get it right in the next. So, another thing that he said to me that I've never said this publicly. You know, when he said that he said, I was fighting with my wife and business was bad and we got in a big fight and she said she wanted a divorce. And at that point I got up out of bed, I said a quick prayer. And then he says, and I said, oh God, not this. And then I came downstairs and abused you. Now, when he said, oh God, not this, it gave me an indication that this has happened before.
Yeah.
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 I picked up on that.
I never really thought of that.
So you said you were drained after the interview, but you also believed him, right?
Not then. I didn't think anything then. I was so emotionally exhausted. I didn't think anything of it. I didn't even know what really happened. Crystal said that I didn't seem scared. I think some power greater than me took over. I don't even know how I asked those questions. In fact, when I listen back to the interview, I sit there and I go, holy crap, like who is that? Because I asked I'm almost a little bit proud of myself. I asked some very direct questions and I dug deeper and I dug deeper. And when he tried to evade me, I would revisit it. And I don't have those skills.
Yeah.
I've never done this before.
Yeah. I was impressed.
I was shaking, sweating and crying the whole time. And he's just all composed. And that didn't even happen to me.
Yeah, I got a message from a good friend of mine, and he basically, won't tell you the whole extent of his message, but it's the nicest thing anybody's ever said about me. And he basically said, how in the hell did you do that?
Yeah, that was super brave. Unbelievable.
It's not the courage. I must have had some help because I just, I don't know how I did it. But yes, as I continued to listen to the interview, the recording thereafter, I started to believe him that there was no other victims. I didn't pick up on that, oh God, not this again. I didn't pick up on that again till probably January. So that was about 4 months after I made the recording.
Okay.
And that was, I remember, I think it might even been Ryan McKnight with Truth and Transparency. He might have even made me aware of that, to be truthful. He might have said, did you pick up on that? And I said, whoa, like that's freaky. Ryan's been so great to me. I want to make sure we can talk about the recording and how I launched it. I owe it to him to thank him. He's the only one I had no one else.
So how'd you go from there? You had the recording.
I'm sorry to say that.
Well, yeah,
We can talk about that. My wife's been very supportive, but I had this recording, and I think that my parents and my wife just felt that should be sufficient.
Yeah. And I believed him, and I didn't want to.
You believe Sterling that what?
That he didn't. There were no other victims.
No other victims, because he denounces. He says no other children,
yeah.
no other.
So I didn't see a purpose to release the recording.
I'd like to go back and see how many times I asked him if there was other victims, because I asked repeatedly.
Yeah, he was very direct and clear.
Yeah.
Then you felt like from your wife and parents, you should let it go.
They were very adamant that it was time to let this go. You did what you needed to do for closure, and now let it go. And I couldn't stop thinking about it nonstop. I just kept thinking about it. We went on a trip. To Hawaii in January for 2 weeks, and I remember feeling like I thought this should be fun. I should be happy. And all I could think about was that recording the whole time. And I think at that point in time, I kind of decided to myself that this is going to happen. I'm going to put this out there to the world in hopes that there's at least one other victim. And if there isn't, then I'm an idiot. That's what I thought. I didn't feel like I need justice. I just felt like if there's one other victim, then this will have all been worth it.
And it will all make sense to you why
I couldn't stop. Like something kept telling me to do something about this. And so I went ahead and released the recording on February 4th through Truth and Transparency.
Right?
Yeah, this year.
And at that time, you didn't know for sure if there were other victims, right?
No, and that's I did it under a pseudonym, David, and I redacted all the other names in the recording that I was trying to be sensitive to other people, and my biggest fear around that recording, and the main reason that I was a pseudonym, John, is because I have about the best parents. I have about the best parents in the world. And I couldn't tolerate, in fact, even as a pseudonym, there was people coming after my parents. And they don't know the whole story. They don't know what my parents were told. And that's for my parents to tell, right? They don't know what my parents were told. And they don't know how my parents were trying so hard to protect me. And they don't understand it was a different climate then than it is now. Very much different. And so I was a pseudonym because I wasn't going to allow my parents to get thrown under the bus. I love them too much. I went through 3 or 4 weeks of pure hell. 4 weeks exactly.
Afterwards?
It was 4 weeks exactly.
After you released it?
Yeah.
Why?
I began second guessing myself. I remember having a conversation. My parents came over to the house the day I launched it. I never told them I was going to do it. They came over and I said I published that recording. And I just remember my mom looking at me like she didn't understand. And I remember saying, I just remember being angry. And I was angry for some reason at the time. And I remember my mom saying, "You need to forgive." And I said, "Nope. God can forgive him, or Jesus can forgive him. I don't have to." I remember she looked at me, and I've never had my mom look at me like that before. Like she didn't recognize me. And from that point forward, I began to feel very confused about what I'd done. I felt like I was second guessing my intentions. I thought maybe I was just out for revenge. I don't know I didn't know what I would to feel. And at that point, it was almost to that, after about 3 weeks, I had a change of heart. I believed him. And I thought I'd done something horrible. And I began to devise a plan that I could make it up to him and offer him redemption. I had a whole plan in place to offer him redemption. And but it was predicated upon there not being any other victims. And then a week later, a victim came forward.
A victim came forward.
A week later there.
What without wanting to identify anyone who doesn't want to be identified, what can you tell us about that victim or the circumstances?
Court documents say it was a family member. She was 9, I think, 9 and 10 or 11, 7 and 9 maybe. 7 the first time, 9 the second. And it even says that it says what he did to her. These are the court documents. This is public stuff. It's not sealed or anything. And says what he did to her.
He rubbed her genitals.
Under the clothing is what I believe it says. And it even says that he went so far as to take her privately to lunch, and he tried to minimize what he'd done, and he basically tried to manipulate her around what he'd done. And
weirdly, he tells her, "This is what I do to my wife.
This is how I show love. This is how I love your grandmother." Oh, excuse me, but it's all out there now.
Right.
It's all out there. And as a family member, as a young child, connect the dots. So.
Yeah. And so that's the second victim.
Yes.
And he had promised you that there were no other victims very explicitly.
Yes.
So a family member must have kind of heard your story, maybe asked around to the children, have any of you ever been mistreated by grandpa, and then it came out.
Yeah, I got a text and it said, I was shopping in Harmon's and I got a text and it said, you were right. You were right. There is another victim. Thank you. Thank you. And I just wept. It all made sense to me now. I just wept and wept and wept. It all made sense why I felt so compelled and I couldn't let this go, even though I was all alone in this. And you're such a supportive person. I would never mean that. And I started to believe him too. So I don't put that on you, but otherwise you and my parents have been very supportive. And since another victim came forward, even my own mom, I told her on the phone and we wept and she said, God is with you. It was God speaking to you all along.
And am I right to say a few more victims have come out since then? That there's more than two?
No. No, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Okay. So that it must have been alleviating for you to feel vindicated, right?
Validated.
Yeah.
I keep getting those two words
Right. No, that's better. That's better. So what happened? For those who haven't been following, what happened with Sterling? In terms of the law.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So then the victim, they pressed charges and he was charged in 2 different counties.
By his own family.
That's right. That's right. And that family, those Van Wagenen children, as far as I'm concerned, they're rock solid gold, and nothing their father did or has done has any bearing on them whatsoever. And I want them to know how much I love them and appreciate them, and thank them for being so concerned for my welfare and being so gracious. Yeah. So Sterling got charged on last Tuesday, again on Thursday. He's going to serve 6 years to life, and his sentencing's on July, I think, 17th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as awful as that is, our goal is not to shame him. It's what enrages me is the system that neglected you, that facilitated silence, that facilitated protection of him, and the system that enabled him to be continually put in positions of power and influence to be able to impact other victims. And it's not even that I'm mad at the church. It's just, we have to do better.
Yeah.
Systems have to do better. and speaking out publicly is the only way that enough awareness gets brought to it so that changes get made, you know?
Mm-hmm. You're right. Yeah, and that's my passion. I've always been so passionate, John. If you know someone that's ever been sexually abused, it doesn't matter to what extent. It becomes very meaningful in your life, and you start to find yourself being a magnet for other victims. Other victims find you, and they tell you things, and you go, "What? What? Me too." So that's amazing. But you also become very passionate about following all kinds of sex abuse cases and supporting other survivors, and it's just part of, and I know that's part of the reason this happened to me. John, I've spent Crystal taught me, my wife taught me, that when you can assign meaning to something tragic that's happened to you in your life, then that tragedy no longer has any power over you. And that day that I read there was another victim, all of a sudden the burden was gone. I understood perfectly why this happened to me in the first place. I understood why I had to come forward, and I understood that my role was to protect other people. I spent a lifetime wondering, why did this happen to me? Why me, and why him? And now it all makes sense.
Crystal, anything you want to share about all this?
It really has been amazing to watch this all unfold and to see how much it's done for Sean, to finally be released of that and to have found the meaning and purpose around that, and to know why all these years he could not let it go, and he's felt so compelled to do what he has done. And so I'm just really happy for him for this all to have come together the way it has, so that he can continue to help other people and to bring awareness around this and to cause change, because he is a brave soul. I just think that there's not a lot of people like him that could do what he did, So he's doing it for a lot of people.
Yeah, we have to address sexual abuse. We have to do the hard things. It's hard. Look how long I avoided it. 25 years. I avoided it because it's just too hard. But I want to thank that little girl, the other victim. Every opportunity I get, I want to thank her, and I want to. She's the real hero, because I just love her for that. Thank you for that. I feel like I did something for her, and she certainly she's removed my burden and giving me renewed purpose and meaning and understanding in my life, and I think she's the real hero.
Yeah, that can't be easy to do within your own family, right?
And at a younger age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's powerful. And I guess we have to mention Ryan McKnight and the Truth and Transparency Foundation, because I've gone through their website, truth and transparency .org, and it's not just Ryan. He has help with Ethan Dodge,
great, man.
And they really have done a professional job. Just to be fully honest, I knew about this story a year ago because you had shared some things with me, and because of what happened with the Sterling Swallow story and the aftermath of that, which I haven't talked about publicly, because this can end really tragically, so I was just, how much do I want to get back into this again? And, I was just, it was just hard for me. But when I look at how professional the Truth and Transparency Foundation was about this, how detailed they were, how meticulous, searching courts documents all over the country, chronicling all this, getting the evidence, refusing to jump at rabbits that might not be sure, sticking with the facts, and then how it landed as a New York Times story.
Yeah.
That's a lot of professionalism and a lot of behind the scenes work that went into this. And so support the Truth and Transparency Foundation.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure they're not getting paid a lot of money for this. And they deserve
I haven't
support.
paid them a dime, and I just can't thank them enough. I mean, they really believe in the mission and the cause of it. And believe me, I've taken a lot of his time, a lot.
Yeah, and I know Ryan's been a personal friend and
That's
support to
right.
you. So shout out to Ryan and Ethan. You guys did great work, and you do great work, and you deserve credit for that.
Yeah.
So our heart goes out to the Van Wagenen family. I hope Sterling is safe. I hope everybody finds healing and meaning. Other victims, I hope if you're out there, you can find a way to get healing and peace. And let's just be clear, this is just one of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of abuse cases in Mormonism that has been covered up like this. It's no mystery that the church has jettisoned the Boy Scout program. We just found out that there's been tens of thousands of abuse cases in the Boy Scouts. Mormons make up half the Boy Scout troops in the nation or something like that. That's just one example, but decades and decades and decades of abuse cover-ups in the Mormon church where victims have been scared, haven't had the privilege or the opportunity to come out. This is just the surface. And the HBO Vice, I recommend everybody check that out. The story was released a couple of days ago. There are many more stories that have been in the works. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. A friend of mine said, "You've given Sterling a gift." Said that to me. Because you've given him an opportunity to overcome this and to address it out in the open. And hopefully he accepts that gift. And it can be a very positive thing for him. And I changed the way I see this. I think he's a good person.
Sterling.
I actually do.
The audio recording so disorienting because he seems so agreeable and thoughtful and supportive of you and honest. I'm like, how can this man sound so thoughtful and wise and abuse children? Like
you know what? The only thing I can say is that we all have our stuff.
Yeah.
We all have our propensities. We all have our crosses to bear. And his is very unsightly. I sincerely hope there's no other victims, and I hope that Sterling can turn his life around for his sake and for that of his family. If there are other victims, my goal is to make it feel safe to come forward. That's the only reason I didn't want any of this.
Somebody says you do this for attention or for,
No,
or an axe to grind against the church.
No.
Or
This is not the kind of attention that I want. I've had enough. I've got enough acclaim in my personal and my professional life. I don't need this. But I want to make it safer. And I feel that I can go first. And that's what I've seen with the climate, the whole Me Too movement. Someone goes first, and it gives others courage.
so we hope other victims will see their day of visibility, because the silence kills, and it's what enables these things to happen. And most importantly, it's what enables the system to stay dysfunctional. The silence allows the system to stay dysfunctional and not to improve. Right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to just do my quick little plea to the Mormon Church, to the LDS Church. Stop having any scenario where children are ever alone with leaders, one-on-one, in any way. Stop that. Do everything you can to do background checks so that we know that in the case of the West Virginia kid, he had abused several families, and then by moving, he's able to abuse more. You can just do simple background checks on leaders and ward members to know who is a perpetrator, right?
Yeah.
Or at least who's been convicted. So, do more to do background checks and to set up structures where vulnerable people and children are never left alone with leaders. Figure out how to identify who the perpetrators are and to carry forward a history and a record. Someone told me that because Sterling Van Wagenen had only been disfellowshipped and not excommunicated, there was nothing on his record so that future stake presidents would know that he had ever been a perpetrator, right? So have a record system in place where these pedophiles and rapists, that record can carry with them wherever they go so that information can be known. Back off this notion of a spirit of discernment. It does not exist. There is no spirit of discernment with Mormon leaders. It's a fraud. It's an inspired leadership. These leaders are not called of God. There are men calling other men and women to positions of leadership based on their best gut, their best information, their emotions, their relationships. There is no inspired callings. There are no inspired callings, or Joseph Bishop would have never been called as the MTC president, right?
Yeah.
Or Sterling Van Wagenen would have never been called as, the director of the Mormon temple videos by top church leadership. There is no spirit of discernment. There is no leaders being called by God. They're just men calling men. And the extent to which you just teach everybody that, right? Then people know, oh my gosh, we need to be more careful. We need to have suspicions. We need to have healthy skepticism so that we can protect ourselves. Yeah. And I have more, but you wanted to jump in.
No, you covered it. Thank you.
You sure?
Yep.
Okay. Get rid of this culture of obedience to authority. Get rid of the patriarchy. Mm-hmm. I was talking to Julie de Azevedo Hanks the other day, and she said if 6 women and 6 men would have been in that room, that disciplinary council with Sterling Van Wagenen, he would not have been disfellowshipped. He would have been excommunicated, right? Mm-hmm. We need to have women in places of leadership so that we have better wisdom and better decisions made, right? But also get rid of this culture of obedience to authority. We have a culture where members are taught to obey their priesthood leadership and to do what they say. No, we don't need a culture of obedience. We need a culture of empowerment and transparency, right? And openness, and of people standing against abuses of power and authority. Mormon Church, stop prioritizing protection of perpetrators at the expense of the victims. Provide victims resources, mental health services for people that are abused in a Mormon context, and stop fighting to protect perpetrators. Report them to police immediately in every instance. Like you said, it's a crime. It's not a transgression. It's a transgression and a crime. But stop protecting the perpetrators. Stop that. Disclose. Ward members and stake members should know who the perpetrators are in their midst. Stop giving callings to perpetrators in the future. I don't care if you believe they've repented. I don't care if you believe in the atonement. Never put a pedophile in primary. Never put a pedophile in young women's. Never put a pedophile or a rapist or an abuser in any position or calling where they could have access again to children or vulnerable people. Stop that. You can do it. Stop it. It doesn't matter if they've been forgiven. Just they're disqualified from future service in any way that would make them vulnerable or make other people vulnerable. Because when you give these people access and status, believing that they've repented, you just leave other people open to being victims later. Have a hotline purely for victims, right? not that goes to Curtin and McConkie, but that goes to mental health professionals that then not only make sure that there's mandatory reporting, but that also provides victims with the help and support that they need. The church, you have hundreds of billions of dollars in assets. You can provide mental health services to victims, right?
Yeah.
And you don't need Curtin and McConkie, the mediator, discouraging people from going to the police, discouraging people from holding perpetrators accountable, and protecting the church's image and its financial position and the perpetrators, again, at the expense of the victims. Utah state legislatures, Mormon church, stop protecting the clergy exemption in Utah. Make it so clergy are mandatory reporters in Utah, so that these cases always get, a school teacher has to mandatory report. Everybody has to report except for church clergy. Stop that. You can change the laws, Utah, make it so everyone has to report. There should not be a clergy exemption. And figure out some sort of theology around the atonement and forgiveness and repentance, so that we don't have this pressure on victims and the family of victims to forgive because the atonement washes it clean. Victims and family of victims should not be pressured to forgive, right?
You're right.
They should not be pressured to let down their guard because this person has been forgiven. But there should be a separation between whatever forgiveness people may or may not do, and whatever beliefs you have about the atonement, and people being made safe, right? That's a few of my rants. Anything you guys want to add?
I think you about covered it.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you. No, that's what we're all about too.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we go forward? Yeah, we need to just talk about this more, right? There needs to be a culture of openness and talking about it.
That's right.
Not silence and keep it quiet and don't air the dirty laundry and it's going to hurt the church's reputation. We talk about abuse. We talk about abusers. We come clean as victims. How is it healing for you to finally be able to talk about this for the first time? Is it healing?
It is.
Yeah.
It really is. It's had a dramatic impact upon my life. I think it's helped my kids understand why I've been as protective as I have been. I think it's even helped like my kids' friends' parents understand why I am the way I am. So vigilant, fanatical. But in terms of my heart, my feelings, my emotions, being able to help other people is what this is all. We need each other as people. And there's an awakening happening universally amongst people relative to religion. And I think that it's the same with sexual abuse, child sex abuse. I think we're going to stop it. I think we're going to make a difference. I think that the future's bright. We just have, like you said, we have to just start taking it a little bit more serious, put a little energy there, a lot of energy there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have to add one last thing. Church, stop excommunicating people like Sam Young and, Lavina Fielding Anderson and, Jeremy Runnels and Kay Kelly and, Leah and Cody Young. All these people are your prophets, seers, and revelators. They're your truth tellers. They're the ones who are trying to save you and other victims. So stop punishing the critics and the whistleblowers that actually are standing on the right side of history. Sam Young and the Protect LDS Children movement, and now it's the Protect All Children movement. Mormon Church, stop punishing these people. Forgive them, apologize, get rid of this culture that we don't seek or offer apologies. Apologize to these victims and apologize to the people like Lavina Fielding Anderson and Sam Young and others who you've punished for trying to get you to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Are you guys wiped out?
We're just as passionate about it as you are.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
We both are.
Yeah.
Well, you guys are heroes for your willingness to talk about this openly. This has to be exhausting and excruciating. And I'm so sorry, and I'm so grateful. And we're all so grateful.
Yeah. It is exhausting, but it's also, it just feels good to be able to feel like we're doing our part in anything that we can. You know, like, we're just so grateful for you and Margie for what you're doing and what you've done for us, for this, to help us through this process. So it feels good to know that we too can do our part to help.
John, thank you, Crystal. Yeah. It does feel good.
Yeah.
It's our little piece.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason this all happened to me, and this story has been as big as it has been, is because there's a tsunami coming of child sexual abuse victims. They're coming forward now, and it's coming. The Mormon Church will have their spotlight moment. I feel it, I sense it, and my story is just a small part of it. It's coming now.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah. So do the right thing, church. And thank you, Escobars, Sean and Crystal, for doing the right thing. And I know this is going to empower others to come forward. And this is going to educate so many people and advance the discussion on how we can protect people in the future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Huge thanks to everyone who's joined us on Facebook Live. Again, so many wonderful comments and perspectives. Huge thanks to Cody Layton for producing this episode and for spending his Saturday with us. Huge thanks to the Mormon Stories donors and the donors to the Open Stories Foundation. We couldn't do this without you. If you continue to value this programming, please give us your support. Go to mormonstories.org and donate. You know, any monthly donation, big or small, helps to keep us alive and to support all our operational costs and support the Truth and Transparency Foundation. Ryan McKnight, Ethan Dodge, they deserve your support. I'm sure they've got other good things in the works, and they're doing good work. So please support them as well. Support, Sunstone and Zelf on the Shelf and all the different organizations, Bill Reel, and Marriage on a Tightrope, and Radio Free Mormon, and Year of Polygamy, and all these different organizations have played roles in all of these, different improvements. And so, for those of you who don't pay tithing to the church anymore, please continue supporting all these organizations that need your support. We are going to still be doing an interview with Crystal. I'm not sure if it'll be today or another day. Please don't forget about this wonderful book, My Life as a Wannabe Balanced Mom. We're going to be interviewing Crystal as well, so stay tuned about that. Come to Thrive. Thrive Beyond Mormonism is a wonderful conference for people who are trying to heal and grow after Orthodox Mormonism. We've got amazing speaker lineup, $75 a person. Nobody's making any money. It's not part of the Open Stories Foundation, but it's a non-for-profit event. This will cost more money than it'll bring in. But we just want to help people improve their marriages, improve their parenting, improve their lives, improve their mental health. So consider coming to Thrive Beyond Mormonism conference in Salt Lake, June 7th through 9th. We'd love to have you. There's only like a couple dozen tickets left. We're almost sold out, but if you want to join us, you can. We'll sell it either way, but grab your tickets now if you want to come. That's going to be amazing. And just please reach out if you have other stories that need to be told, mormonstories@gmail.com. You can reach out to us, and we'll do our best to have these stories be told. Anything we're forgetting? Time to wrap up.
Thank you, John.
All right.
Thanks for everything you do. You've helped us a lot.
Likewise. All right, everybody. Take care. Now you can enjoy your Saturdays. Have a great day. Thanks again, everybody.